Our first speaker is Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, a Keenan Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience and the Director of Positive Emotions and Psychophysiology Laboratory at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Fredrickson is known for her broaden and build theory of positive emotions. Today, she will share with us human positive emotion research. Welcome, Dr. Fredrickson.
I had my cursor right over unmute and then everything disappeared for a second. So sorry about that. Thank you for the warm introduction. I'm going to just take a moment to share my slides. Okay, I'm assuming you all see the slides at this point?
It looks great.
Okay. I've been invited to share with you my own research area, which is the study of human positive emotions. I am hoping the expertise in the collective here will serve to draw the connections to animal research. I do not do any animal research. I just want to make that clear at the start. But I'm hoping that the insights from human science on this will be of value to you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that help you draw out the connections. So I want to first just give a shout out to my team of graduate students, staff members. A lot of undergraduate students are involved in this research as well. And I've benefited from support for my research mostly from the National Institutes of Health, but also from some private foundations as well. And the reason there's such a variety of funding is that nobody funds well-being research and positive emotions, so you have to shop around to a lot of different audiences. So that's kind of part of the process. I want to talk about, or just mention briefly, a few assumptions about research on positive emotions and emotions. This isn't the focus of the talk, but I think there are important assumptions to state clearly, and we can come back and talk about these in the Q&A period if you wish. One is I study a phenomena that is momentary. Positive emotions last seconds, maybe minutes, but they arise like a wave on the ocean and then dissipate. It's the brevity that made them understudied for so long. People thought they were irrelevant because they're brief. And the research shows that they're far from irrelevant simply because they're brief. The other thing I want to mention is that emotions are embodied. They are not just thoughts that roll through our minds. Our emotions are what really are at the crux of like mind-body medicine, if you will, mind-body connections, because they're like embodied, energized thoughts. This is a slide from hundreds of participants who are asked to indicate where in their bodies they feel energized in red and yellow, or de-energized in blue and white, where in their body they feel energized or de-energized with different specific emotions. Just quickly look at sadness. The limbs are a liability during sadness. They drain energy. Anger, there's energy in hands and heart and head. And positive emotions, now this is an old school view that there's one positive emotion. That's not necessarily the case, but that there's a lot of energy all over the body and the head and the heart in particular. And another assumption I want to make clear is that positive emotions are not one thing. They come in many different flavors. There are high energy ones like joy and amusement. And there's more cerebral ones like awe and interest. And then there's calmer ones still like serenity and gratitude. So in human emotion science, we're talking about many of these. Another assumption I want to put out there is that Positive emotions are not the opposite of negative emotions. They have different functions, they have different timelines, they serve very different purposes. And there's tons of asymmetries throughout this field. People come in with the assumption that there will be symmetries, and it's really important to point out the most obvious asymmetry is bad is stronger than good. Our brains are drawn to negative information because that held survival value for our ancestors, and positive information is more subtle and can be easily overlooked. But another asymmetry is that positive events in people's lives are more frequent than the negative. It's part of why bad needs to be stronger than good, because people aren't experiencing it as frequently. So that's an important asymmetry. And then I want to step back a bit. I am an expert in emotions. That's what I've spent my career studying. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. But a good life is not just positive emotions. A good life is, in the human research, is described as a meaningful life, happy, that's the positive emotion, frequent positive emotions, and a psychologically rich life, meaning lots of varied life experiences. So what makes for a good life is multifaceted, not just feeling happy all the time. And certainly remember, positive emotions are brief. Nobody could feel happy all the time. That's not a reasonable expectation. I have written about my research in 2 books for a general audience. I always like to read scientists' books for a general audience when it's outside my field, because it's a kind of a quick and accessible way to get a sense of what's going on in other areas of science. These are 2 that I've written. Positivity is the first one that talks about the first 15 years or so of my career, focused on the individual effects of positive emotions on an individual's well-being, individual's thinking, individual's health. And Love 2.0 is, I'll focus a bit more on that, the core ideas in that today. It's about co-experienced or collaboratively experienced positive emotions. It's not a book about romantic love, despite the name. Now, one thing about positive emotions that we know is reliable but subtle is positive emotions fundamentally change the way the human brain takes in information. It expands our awareness. We're able to see more in our peripheral vision. We're able to see the bigger picture, connect the dots. This is a momentary effect of positive emotions, but they widen our outlook. We become less, single focused, trained on one aspect of the environment, and we take in more. Part of that could be as simple as our heads are up and we're more likely to look around and feel comfortable. So we take in more information during those moments. We experience positive emotions. It also shows up in the way the body moves. This is a study where they asked people to move this mannequin in a way that would express how you would like to express different emotions. This was elation. This kind of gets over people's self-consciousness of like, oh, I wouldn't want to actually do that in a laboratory. But they move a mannequin and show how those emotions make them feel. We've done work with a kinesiologist to look at how people actually move through the world. And there is an expanded torso that goes with positive emotions. The reason that these moments of broadened awareness and expansiveness matter is because little by little, they help put individuals on trajectories of growth. It builds people's resources, so they function as nutrients for growth. So this is where the time scale of negative emotions and positive emotions are very different. Negative emotions helped our ancestors get out of situations that are threats to life and limb during the moment of the experience. Positive emotions do not have a survival benefit in the moment, but they have survival benefits over time as there's more accrual of frequent mild positive emotions, because those function as nutrients for health and growth of resources like resilience, social bonds, understanding of one's environment, and so on. So one of the resources that is built is resilience. My team has a longstanding interest in resilience. We find that the more positive emotions people experience in the last 6 weeks predicts their resilience as they're dealing with life stressors. And positive emotions are part of what people who are more resilient cultivate in difficult situations. It's not like they're ignoring the bad, but they're meeting the bad with some good, with some hope, with some sense of challenge, so that it's as if resilient people don't feel shattered by the negative. They feel alerted. And so that's what allows them to be resilient. Positive emotions are part of what allows resilient people to bounce back, and positive emotions help build the resource of resilience over time. Some of the resources that positive emotions build, many of them make it more likely that an individual is going to experience positive emotions in the future. So just like there's a downward spiral between depression and pessimistic thinking, there are also upward spirals where positive emotions build resources like friendship, resources like resilience, resources like knowledge of one's environment. And those resources allow people to cultivate more readily positive emotions next season, next week, in the future. So this upward spiral is part of the dynamics of experiencing frequent positive emotions over time. I used to think that all positive emotions function somewhat similarly. They all broaden people's mindsets in different, to some degree, in different circumstances, that they build resources comparably. Using the metaphor of nutrients, I now think that among positive emotions, there's a superfood among them, meaning ones that provide more nutrients for growth over time for individuals, and that is co-experienced positive emotions, collaboratively experienced positive emotions, a particular flavor of positive emotions that's shared with another and imbued with warmth and kindness. And I call this positivity resonance. And I have argued and been collecting data to show that it provides perhaps stronger broaden and build benefits for individuals than other positive emotions. Other positive emotions still matter. It's just a matter of degree, where positivity resonance stands a little bit taller. So it could be laughing with a friend or a child, celebrating a success with a coworker at work, moment of offering compassion to another is also an example of positivity resonance. And I want to just point out that the most obvious emotion in the room when you're offering somebody compassion is suffering, and that suffering is the cause for bringing people to try to offer comfort. And yet within that suffering, there is an element of shared positivity. It's not the same positive emotion for each person. The person who's suffering might feel, at least I'm seen, at least this person is recognizing what's going on for me. The person who is able to offer comfort is, at least I can do this. I can take reasonable satisfaction and pride in being able to help out. So even though suffering is the strongest emotion, there's also an element of shared positivity. I like this example because it's not the same positive emotion that each person is feeling, but there's a thread of connection through warmth and kindness. Now, the simplest example of positivity resonance is smiling at a baby. Doesn't even have to be your baby. It can be the baby on the train or in the cafe. And the reason this is such a great example is when we connect with pre-verbal humans, we need to do it with great attunement and sensitivity. So it shows that kind of mutual focus, but also that we need to be attuned as to how our expressions of positivity are being felt by the other. So we all know that if we come on too strong, this baby's going to cry. It's not going to laugh and giggle. But we need, so we're kind of going through this dance of trying to get just the right measure so that we can collaboratively experience and uplift. And it's a dance that's done through facial expression and nonverbal behavior and sense of expression of warmth. So these are the kinds of, the argument I'm going to make is that positivity resonance is an elemental building block of love. We consider in the human emotion research, love is like up on a pedestal as like this grand experience. And I'm trying to like draw it down to the momentary wave that what is the most elemental unit of love would be these moments of warm-hearted co-experienced positivity. And a lot of the things that people end up calling love are the products of having that experience more frequently, the bonds, the commitment, and so on. So just to get to a formal definition of positivity resonance, I consider it an interpersonally situated collective experience that's marked by three momentary features. Emotions are embodied, and so there's a co-experienced positive affect, but plus a cross-person synchrony in carrying nonverbal cues. So it's somewhat easy to spot these moments from afar because you can see how people are moving differently. And a cross-person synchrony in biological responses. So people's heart rates are rising and falling in the same way. And in one way to think about this is this one emotion that's rolling across two brains and bodies at once, two or more. I talk about two a lot because it's linguistically easy, but it's possible for these to be collectively experienced in larger units than just two. Over time, that little wave, that ripple of wave on the ocean, that's co-experienced positive emotion, synchrony and nonverbal cues that are caring and kind, and synchrony and biological responses. Over time, that builds a sense of chemistry, of a sense of rapport with another, like feeling like you really clicked. It builds our most important social bonds. They don't just pop out of nowhere. They are derived from experience and accumulation of positive experiences. And in the human world, it's really important to point out that commitment, loyalty, trust emerge from these kinds of moments. So like in organizations and schools and communities, we're always kind of wringing our hands at how do we build trust. People's sense of generalized trust has certainly been eroding in step with rises in economic inequality. This theory can give a blueprint for how to rebuild the trust that we know communities need. So I want to turn to how we measure this. There are some ways that are going to be limited to human science, self-reports, but there are objective ways that we've measured collective positive emotions that wouldn't require self-reports, and so could be transportable into the animal literature, the non-human animal literature. So one way that we measure this is we try to stay true to the brevity of emotions by not having people respond to how do you feel in general, but to think back to a specific episode, like having coffee this morning with your family members, or joining a colleague in the hallway for a quick conversation before you start getting to work. Thinking about an episode of social interaction. And then we have people report in that episode, did you experience a mutual sense of warmth and concern towards one another, a mutual sense of being energized and uplifted, that's the embodied component, and a mutual sense of, or feeling in sync with the other, feeling like you're on the same page, you're kind of moving together in sync. So those are the kinds of, we're not asking people, did you like the other person? Did you feel good? We're asking people to report on a collective experience. We find that if you aggregate across the social episodes of people's days, so instead of just getting one episode, you get all the social episodes of a day and get the degree of positivity resonance associated with each social episode, that is well correlated with flourishing mental health, which is the positive side of mental health, feeling that you experience lots of positive emotions, but also positive meaning and social contribution. There's also less of the negative side of mental health, less depression, less loneliness, and fewer illness symptoms. This was a self-reported finding in a large sample. We were shut down from doing our laboratory research during COVID, so we did lots of survey studies. And we also find that these associations between positivity resonance and mental health are preserved and evident even in the early months of the pandemic, April, May, June 2020. I want to turn now to some studies that I did with archival data on long-term married couples, because this is where we developed our objective measures of positivity resonance. And this was a work I did on my sabbatical about 8 years ago. I returned to the research lab where I had done my postdoc 30 years ago. And so we're able to dig into some data that I had helped collect way back when my 20-something self was in Bob Levinson's lab. And I got a chance to work with some of his most current trainees, which have been phenomenal collaborators. So here is a study of long-term marriages that Bob Levinson and John Gottman and Laura Carstensen designed. At the time, it was the very first scientific study of long-term marriages. Every other study of marriage had been on newlyweds. So this was a study of long-term married couples, people who had been married either more than 15 years or more than 35 years. So they were mid-aged and older adults. Part of the study was to come into the laboratory, have a 15-minute conversation about an area of continued disagreement in the marriage. I say 900 seconds because we're going to work with the second-by-second data. Also during that time, we are measuring physiological measures, heart rate, sweat gland activity, and so on. The interactions are videotaped. Those videotapes had previously been painstakingly coded. Each second for each spouse was coded with one of several positive emotions or one of several negative emotions or neutral. So for every second, every one of those 900 seconds, we could say the wife was feeling neutral, the husband was showing negativity. This is based on expressed positivity. So I should say the wife was expressing no emotion, the husband was expressing negativity and that sort of thing. And then there was, this was the late 80s, early 90s. There was this old school rating dial made from a dimmer switch from electronic supply store that were individuals from these couples came back to the laboratory about a week later, watched their own video by themselves, and rated how they were feeling during the conversation. So this is a way to bring in subjective self-report to the same fine-grained time scale as the physiological measures and the behavioral measures. And so the first thing we started looking at was the biological synchrony aspects, looked at covariation between two individuals' physiological states. I'm just going to give you an example with heart rate, interbeat interval. So this is a tracing of interbeat interval for the husbands and the wives. And what we did was create a 30-second rolling window across those 900 seconds and looked at the correlation between the two interbeat intervals during that 30 seconds. These were second-by-second data. So you can see at this initial window, both spouses' heart rates are changing in a similar direction, and so we have high markers of synchrony. At another moment, they're also showing changes in the same direction. So that translates into high synchrony. Here's a moment where one spouse is not showing much change in heart rate, and over here there's not, and so there's lesser synchrony. So we computed this across all the physiological variables we had access to. Separately, based on that expressive coding, we divided those 900 seconds into 6 different types, where there was either positive emotions expressed by each spouse or by just one spouse, negative emotions expressed by each spouse shared or just one spouse, and similarly for neutral. And so because we did this as positive alone, we have separate data for wives and husbands. And we had a very lively collaboration, because I went in there to show that, to test the idea that positive emotions, shared positive emotions, would have the strongest physiological synchrony. Bob Levinson had the bad is stronger than good prediction, which was, no, you're going to see much more synchrony in shared physiology during shared negative compared to anything else. And the postdoc that led the project thought, well, any emotion shared should lead to more sense of synchrony than non-emotion, emotions not being shared. So we all had very different predictions, which led to some interesting reanalysis and reanalysis and reanalysis to make sure that this was robust. And we find that the in-phase linkage, meaning two people's physiology changing in the same direction at the same time, is highest for shared positive emotions compared to shared negative and shared neutral. That was true for husbands. That's also true for wives. Whether you divide it into mid-life adults versus older adults, you see the same thing. When you look at individual different physiological markers, you see the same thing across them. It's shared positivity, which is associated with the most synchrony in this biological response. We also created a new coding system from the videotapes to look at this sense of oneness in positive emotional expression. So we took a team of undergraduates and trained them on the concept of positivity resonance, and asked them to look at 30 seconds of video at a time, not 1 second. But across 30 seconds, did the two spouses show actions, words, voice intonation, nonverbal behavior that conveyed mutual warmth, mutual concern, mutual affection, or a shared tempo that might show up in shared smiles or shared laughter. And for each 30 seconds of this 15-minute conversation, they rated it as 0, 1, or 2. And I put this heart made of hearts icon there because I'm gonna, when I show that again in future slides, I'm referring to this measure. We call it BIPR for shorthand, Behavioral Indicators of Positivity Resonance. So 0 would be, I didn't see that at all. 1 would be, I saw it 1 time. 2 would be, I saw it multiple times or for a really extended length of time. And we have a number of different ways that we could look at shared positivity. From the rating dials, we could capture how many seconds did both spouses show positivity at the same second as when they were separately watching the videotapes of their interaction. Certainly, it was a conflict interaction. Not all couples had a lot of shared positivity, but it was present for sure. Shared negativity was much more common. And then we had the co-expressed positive affect, those 900 buckets of seconds. We had another coding scheme that looked at shared smiles, head nods, leaning in, that was in synchrony. I shared with you the way we get in phase, interbeat, interval linkage, and then this behavioral indicators of positivity resonance. If you look at those variables as indicators of an underlying latent construct, there's excellent model fit. And the strongest predictor is over here with this behavioral indicators of positivity resonance. But we looked at this latent variable that's indicated by each of these objective measures. And again, I mentioned that we had these data from 30 years ago. And over that, for the first 16 years, people provided self-reports of their chronic illness symptoms and marital satisfaction. Concurrently and predictively, we see a connection between shared positivity as measured objectively here and marital satisfaction. That's not all that surprising, but it's independent of people's individually experienced positive affect and the overall tone of the conversation. And we see that prediction also with the behavioral indicators. More interesting is the ability of this one 15-minute conversation, an objective measure gathered from this 15-minute conversation, to predict the trajectories of chronic illness symptoms over the next 16 years. Now, these are older adults, midlife and older adults, so it's not surprising that their chronic illness symptoms are increasing over 16 years. But we find that for couples in marriages where there was above average positivity resonance, the trajectory of increase is significantly less steep. We also see that predictive, that the behavioral indicators alone is able to predict that just as well. We also looked at, we found a connection between the positivity resonance from this first 15-minute conversation and whether people were still in our data set at time 4. That got us curious. We saw a connection where people with the lowest positivity resonance were least likely to still be in the data set. And we wondered what made them quit the study. They didn't quit the study because they got bored, because it was a very engaging study. If you study marriages, people come in and they know it's important. They didn't quit the study because they got divorced. These are marriages that had already lasted 15 or 35 years, so they were the lasting ones. They stopped being in the study because one in the couple had died. So we went and took the informal lab records that had clued us off to look at this, and then went to look for official death records of all the people that were in our study. And we found that there was an ability of this positivity resonance metric to predict the likelihood of someone still being alive 30 years later. So, and that's independent of the demographics of the sample, independent of their time one at the time of the positivity resonance, health symptoms and health behaviors, independent of their individual level positive emotion. This is what makes me say this co-experienced positive emotions may be more consequential than individually experienced positive emotions, and more independent of people's reports of how great their marriage is, which was a known predictor of longevity. This is picking up something different than what people say about their marriages. It's more about how they relate to one another. And as you can imagine, some people's ratings of their marriage are filtered through rose-colored glasses, kind of wishful thinking instead of how they actually behave day to day. And we get the same predictive ability if we use the one best marker of that latent variable, the behavioral indicators. So there's a connection between positivity resonance and long life. And this is what makes me argue or bolster the argument that I'd made prior to this, that positivity resonance is a health behavior. We need to be thinking of it in the same way as we think of physical activity, in the same way we think of eating nutritious food, that positive emotions collaboratively experienced with another is part of health. Just because I've spent so much time emphasizing marriage, I want to point out that the positivity resonance that people experience with strangers and people they barely know is also a strong contributor to mental health. So here we have a comparison between the positivity resonance people feel with their inner circle versus everybody else, and they're comparable and independent predictors of well-being. So one thing that is true of positive emotions and positivity resonance is that they are fleeting. They do not last, but they are forever renewable. These are renewable experiences if we can create some conducive conditions. Some of the conducive conditions we know from our past research is real-time sensory connection. Humans feel much more positivity resonance with one another when they're in person, face-to-face, relative to being on a Zoom call. There's also a connection to generalized trust and safety that can be fostered either by having an interaction partner who scores high on empathy, or an interaction partner who listens carefully, attends closely, or to be in a situation where there is lesser inequality and lesser anticipated discrimination. So a lot of times in positive psychology, people are trying to think through, well, how do you get a good life? How do you create the life you want? And my take on that is that often people are looking far too far ahead and not into the present moment. And I would offer you the perspective that uplift in the present moment, even if it's short-lived, if it's frequently experienced, is part of what lights the path to that good life well-being that we seek. So I'd be happy to open up to questions if you would wish.